After just a small divergence in our timeline, 1248 became known as the year when Subutai, Cadan, James of Aragon and Louis IX of France perished in battle. That same year, the Latin Empire completed its conquest of the Peloponnese, and Castile captured Seville after a 16-month siege. While North and East Germany were almost entirely decimated, most Mongol forces were repelled. One would think that this was the greatest triumph in the history of Catholicism, but that same year, the city of Rome was sacked by Batu and Emperor Frederick. A new power would emerge to take them on. And by power, we mean something rather ordinary and historical. We know many of you prefer things a little more magical, so we'll also shout out the sponsor of this video, Ubi's Adventures, who bring you a new campaign setting. It's called Sentima Sundered Wilds, and provides an unforgiving world, twisted by eldritch energy that brings both dangers to battle and secret powers to seize. It's a campaign that takes real preparation and grit for players to get through. There's a focus on monsters, crafting, survival, researching the world, and dealing with hostile conditions, and it's highly customizable, so you can focus on your preferred aspects, from combat, horror, adventure, or survival, with color-coded rules to shape the game. The campaign comes with an illustrated monster manual with stat blocks for 50 of Sentima's monsters, complete with signature attacks and special items. Plus, you can build your own monstrosities with the manual's help. There's a Kickstarter campaign that has just started, which is running a treasure hunt event you can join in on. And you can also check out their main website for downloadable test packs and maps. Links to everything you'll need will be in the description, so check out Sentima Sundered Wilds for something far wilder than the world we're building here. The timely arrival of the Norwegian fleet saved Lübeck, while the Pyrrhic victory at the Battle of the Fulda Gap repelled the main force of the Horde. The Mongols north of the Alps were scattered and leaderless. The armies of Shiban and Berke, or at least what was left of them, turned into murderous bands of pillagers who viciously looted small villages. Emperor Wenceslaus urged the Crusaders to press on and finish the job, but without Louis, the French army refused to march any further. The 21-year-long reign of the man now called Saint Louis was nothing short of astonishing. A paragon of virtue, lawfulness, and courage that many volunteered to follow in life and in death. A giant host of French and German troops and civilians slowly made their way back to Paris, led by his widow Margaret of Provence. The Queen Regent hosted a huge funeral procession, attended by most of the French nobility and a few English nobles, most notably Richard, the Earl of Cornwall, who was married to her sister Sonkia, and King Henry VIII, who married her sister Eleanor. As per his request, Louis's entrails were placed in an urn at Notre Dame, his heart was left in Frankfurt, and his body was buried at the Basilica of Saint-Denis near Paris. Margaret crowned Europe's saviour with the crown of thorns he had purchased from Constantinople, kissed him through her seal, and sealed his tomb. A week of mourning was declared in the city, and while people wept, Margaret whispered in the ears of her fellow lords. But while alliances and schemes were being hatched, Rome was calling out for aid. Batu's siege had begun just 4 days after the battle, and in June 1248, the city had fallen thanks to the betrayal of Ezzelino III de Romano, causing a shockwave that spread through the Christian world. The King of Aragon lost his life defending the city, and Pope Innocent IV was executed at the Colosseum. Rumours spread like wildfire, with many preachers fanning the flames of panic and hysteria. People spoke of the end times, and outside of Castile and France, many Catholic and Orthodox Christians believed that the battle in Germany was Armageddon itself. After the first Mongol invasion in 1242, famine and plague already began to spread and ravage the population. With this second and much larger invasion, starvation was even more rampant. Noble lords held up in their castle manors and stockpiled as much food as they could get their hands on, leaving the lower classes to starve or resort to brigandry. Trade collapsed, and many craftsmen were left without a trade. Emigration from the North German plain was so widespread that entire communities relocated and founded new towns on the western bank of the Rhine, such as Mark Grafenberg, Termak, and Kolneneustadt, while new Jewish settlers moved to the now devastated Bohemia to found towns like Zerminger and Yeshua. In the winter of 1248, combining these factors would result in a catastrophic wave of peasant rebellions, aimed primarily at the clergy, as desperate mobs would start tearing down decadent churches and selling off gold and silver ornaments for bread and onions. The papal state was the centrifugal force that kept the delicate balance and established a form of universal Christian code. With the Pope out of the picture, there was a spiritual and secular power vacuum, and the first state that attempted to fill that void was one that managed to stay neutral through these events. The Venetian Republic was founded by survivors of Aquileia after Attila the Hun razed it to the ground in 752. Even after almost a millennia, its inhabitants kept the memory alive and had no sympathies for the Mongol horde, nor did they shed too many tears for the fall of the papacy. Better than most, they understood the coming crisis. The invasions would rapidly decrease trade, raise inflation, and cause mass migration to the city, which was already overpopulated, with over 80,000 citizens who had no direct access to fresh water. The Council of 40, called the Quarentia, convened for an emergency meeting on July 22, 1248, where the acting Doge, Jacopo Tiepolo, voluntarily resigned in favour of the newly elected Raniero Zeno, who was skilled in warfare and an open rival to the papacy in the past. After 5 days of heated discussion, the most important members of the city nobility, clergy and guilds dramatically altered the course of history. Venice was to mobilize for a massive endeavor and transform over 80% of its merchant fleet into a war fleet, 50 war galleys in total. The treasury was to be emptied in order to fulfill a 3-year plan. After a grand speech on St. Mark's Square, Doge Tiepolo announced that the Republic would rise to the occasion and restore not just Rome itself, but the Roman Republic. Using their connections and wealth, Venice extended a hand to the decaying Latin Empire and purchased it for themselves. The Seventh Crusade called upon every French knight, leaving no fresh reinforcements for the struggling Latins. Back in 1204, the Partitio Terrarum Imperii Romanii was signed, making the Venetian Doge lord of a quarter and a half of the Roman Empire. Soon after, there was even a vote to move the capital to Constantinople, which almost succeeded. Members of the Inquisition immediately cracked down on the Orthodox clergy and imposed a new form of Christianity which was yet to form its concrete identity. The main goal was to give people hope in a time of crisis and direct their hatred towards those who failed them, a strategy that was carried out with great efficiency by some of the best educated orators of the time. Now they proceeded to take over every other merchant quarter that wasn't theirs already, specifically those of their rival Genoa. Once again, the Mongol incursion made it impossible for Genoa to defend its interests, and within just a few months, it was cut off from its main ally in the region, Nicaea. After imposing themselves in the region, Venice started creating allies and vassals. The Despotate of Epirus, Duchy of Athens, and Morea struggled with resources and needed naval support. Venice was capable of helping with both problems, setting them on a path that would eventually lead to their vassalization to the Republic. Bulgaria, which was in the middle of the turmoil of a regency, was next, and finally the powerful Serbian king Stephanouros I also joined this new faction. Each state was given assurances and bribes, and in return, their leaders became subservient to the Doge and accepted this new branch of Christianity we now know as Tupolianism. This gave Venice the one thing they were lacking: land forces. For the past couple of decades, the Balkans saw interests constantly shift, depending on who was the dominant power, and at the time, it was the Empire of Nicaea, which had recently taken much of Thrace, including Philippopolis, Rodosta, Kypsela, Ceres, and most importantly, Adrianople and Thessaloniki. Venice held the key that led to the destruction of this dominant force, swaying all the smaller powers to what they soon realized was the new anti-Mongol faction. The Venetians were racing against time, as they knew that as soon as wintertime arrived, the crisis would exacerbate, and Batu would start a new campaign. Messengers raced from one court to the next, as they set up one of the most influential plots in history within just 2 months. The Doge managed to get in touch with Deni Türye, a childhood loyal friend and companion of Bela IV of Hungary. Using their network of spies disguised as merchants, the Venetians were able to rescue the Hungarian king from captivity. First, most nomads stationed in Esztergom were lured by reports of a Venetian raid on Split. In the dark of night, Denis and 24 loyalists strangled the few remaining dungeon guards and rescued Bela. The king was loaded up on a carriage transporting lettuce and moved to friendly Serbia, where an army of mercenaries, as well as Serbians, Bulgarians and Epirotes, awaited him. Word quickly got out to the Mongol detachment, and to avoid distraction, they quickly left Hungary to rendezvous with Batu. As Bela marched forward toward the Hungarian capital, his citizens rejoiced at the passage of their now free king. Only a few regions refused to kneel to Bela, most notably the autonomous regions of Slavonia, Croatia and Bosnia, who saw more freedoms at the hand of Batu than they ever did under Bela. Batu was furious. He knew that the loss of Hungary would put him in a dangerous position. He was forced to abandon Italy, despite the fact that a few cities still resisted in the north. Hungary was the doorway to the Eurasian steppe, and losing it now would not only risk his life, but unravel all the gains the Mongols had made, a domino effect that could endanger his lands from the Danube to the Volga. Batu bid Frederick II goodbye, presenting him with his personal hunting eagle, and rode away from Italy alongside Bela's son Stephen, who by this point was more Mongol than Hungarian after months of campaigning with his captors. In May 1249, Batu gathered his entire host of 19,200 steppe warriors and moved towards the Hungarian capital in a race for the kingdom. Along the way, they gazed upon the bustling city of Venice, protected by the Adriatic Sea. The Mongols sacked several fishing villages along the coastline and taunted the Venetians, but to no avail. The Alps are the great barrier separating Italy from France and Germany, but that shield has 2 openings on the east, which is where the Mongols wanted to go. One went through the friendly territory of Gorizia, held by Meinhard I, while the other at Trieste was held by the Venetians since 1203. Other crossings, such as the one Batu used to get into the peninsula, were also available, but those were riskier and would allow Bela to rally a massive Hungarian host. So in reality, that only left 2 available routes for Batu, of which he chose the southern one, so that he could quell resistance and deplete the strength of his enemies along the coast. What he didn't count on, however, was how many Christians flocked to Venice after the sack of Rome, and that they had been preparing Mongol countermeasures ever since Batu entered Italy. On May 25th, the massive Mongol horde approached the floodplains of Inlisoncem, or as we know it today, Isonzo River, surprised to find it fortified and guarded on the other side. The river was treacherous, wide, and patrolled by Venetian war galleys and smaller vessels, protected by wooden shields. On board were numerous crossbowmen, who fired at the Mongol forces via tiny slits or wooden doors which were closed while the crossbow was being reloaded. And these weren't just Venetians. Refugees from all across Italy, including cities allied to Frederick, were spread across the river in small contingents. Large contingents also guarded some of the narrower points from various local nobles. The delta was where the Venetians, including Doge Jacopo Tiepolo, were stationed, while the Patriarch of Aquileia, Berthold, took position upstream. Previously, in 1241, the Patriarch participated in the defense of the Holy Roman Empire, and since then, urged the Pope and Emperor to call for a crusade. Now he had evacuated his entire city and armed the citizens along the Pieris front, his contingent bolstered by the force sent by Trieste. Finally, between the Isonzo and Torre rivers was a large contingent made up of the Dukes of Carinthia and Caniola, Bernhard Spanheim and Ulrich III Spanheim, alongside Philip Spanheim, who was the Archbishop of Salzburg. This great family line had 90 heavy-mounted knights under their service, and was ready to fall back to the second line at Saint-Pierre should the Mongols break through. The different contingents had a continuous line of communication, allowing them to redeploy to the areas the Mongols would attempt to cross. In total, the Allied force was made up of 28 warships, 52 smaller vessels, 5,000 infantry, 4,000 crossbowmen, and around 110 knights. The Mongols had the numerical advantage. Their troops had the better range, more disciplined warriors, and faster mobility, but in the floodplain of the Isonzo, they were stripped of most of their advantages. Batu made camp at the ruins of Aquileia and considered his options, while his scouts looked for a crossing. The Mongols had no siege engineers and couldn't afford to look weak by asking their Italian allies for help. Venice was unreachable. The Isonzo was deep, surrounded by mountainous terrain, forming deep gorges, and each day Bela was getting closer to achieving his goal. The ground was soft and wet, which meant that no more than a few hundred horsemen could be deployed in any given location, and resources were scarce. Looting was an option, but not if the Mongols could not sack cities that had already submitted to them. Not to mention that the only major settlement in the area was Edine, which was far away and couldn't feed a force of 20,000 on its own. As the scouts came back, they reported that they had found 2 narrow openings that no more than a dozen enemies defended. Batu gave the order, and 500 Mongols headed to each of them. There was no sign of resistance, so before sentries could approach, each of the 2 groups began crossing the Isonzo. Mongol horses were smaller than their European counterparts, and many were washed away along with their riders, while others made it to the other side. With a stable footing secured, most rushed into the water, at which point bolts began flying from all directions. The coalitions left these gaps in the lines on purpose, and pounced on the invaders while they were defenseless. The Isonzo turned red, and bodies floated downstream for both sides to witness. Of the 1,000 Mongols, only 78 made it back to camp. Batu dispatched 2 groups towards Udine, each one consisting of 2,000 warriors, but they had different goals. While they were away, the remaining 14,000 were spread across the river and took turns in trying to fire over it, striking down enemies where they stood. This standoff continued for a week, during which both sides learned each other's weaknesses. The Allies had control of the river, and fishing provided them with a steady stream of food the Mongols lacked, while both sides took advantage of the dense forests around the river and hunted wild game. Most Mongols did the unthinkable and abandoned their horses, opting for sneak attacks from the top of trees. In that week, around 610 Allied soldiers were struck down while fishing or defending their posts. On the 4th day, the Mongols tracked the movements of a Venetian galley, and at a given signal, fired barrages of arrows from multiple angles, cleaning out its crew before withdrawing. But the Allies didn't stay idle. The projectile exchange was usually in their favour, particularly in the delta area. Multiple crossing attempts were stopped, and most notably, 2 sallies were attempted once they found out which areas were guarded by Mongols on foot. 3 ships were tied together, making a makeshift bridge with ladders connecting both sides of the river near Papariano, allowing a contingent of nearly 1,000 men to descend upon the Mongol position and devastate their ranks before pulling back. Overall, Batu lost just over 1,300 men in the span of 6 days. But then, on the 7th day, he made his move. While his first detachment of 2,000 men brought back supplies from Udine, the other group crossed the much smaller Torre River and returned to the front line. 500 of them were heavy lancers, while the rest were swift horse archers. Both groups charged at the Spanheim camp, which was caught completely off guard. The alarm was sounded and a network of bonfires was lit, letting everyone up to the delta know what was happening. Ships began rowing upstream, trying to reinforce the point, while Batu ordered 3,000 men to cross the Torre. Bernhard rallied his knights and formed a line at a narrow strip, squeezed by bends of both rivers, only 260 meters across. Desperate stragglers tried to swim to safety, discarding their equipment as the Mongols pressed on. The fighting was intense, but the brave Imperial Knights held the line as their shields deflected thousands of arrows. The densely forested area made it difficult for support fire from the Mongols to reach the enemy, and within 40 minutes, ship after ship joined the fight on either side. Venetian crossbows fired at the flanks of the Mongols, and even the Doge's flagship, the Bucintoro, joined the battle, sending ballista bolts against the steppe warriors. After another hour of intense fighting, the battlefield turned to mud and was littered with casualties. The Mongols pulled back to the camp that was already being built by the 3,000 that made it over to Vilnese, and before long, Batu and the remainder of his forces moved across under the constant barrage of crossbows. The intense clashes ended all hope of crushing the resistance and razing Trieste to the ground. With their tails between their legs, 11,000 Mongols finally crossed the Isonzo through allied Gorizia. Bernhard lost his son Ulrich in the fighting, but for him and the rest of the coalition, this was an incredible victory that solidified the Venetians as the last bastion of hope in Italy. Back in the west, plots also ran deep in the French court. Louis had given his life to prevent the utter destruction of Christendom, but now the question was how to retake and rebuild what the Mongols destroyed, and punish those who aided them. In the next and final episode of this series, Batu will clash with Bela, and the news of Louis's death will shake France to its very core, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. The writer and animator of this series will be in the comment section, so make sure to tell us what you think about this video, and which videos you hope to see in the future. Your feedback is very important to us. Like, comment and share, it helps immensely. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.